The man walked into the restaurant just before closing. He looked exhausted. His clothes were expensive but wrinkled. His hair was soaked from the rain, and his hands trembled slightly as he lowered himself into a corner booth. The restaurant was nearly empty. Only one waitress remained. Her name was Maria. She had been working double shifts for weeks, trying to save enough money to keep her family's small apartment from being taken by the bank. She was tired, but when she approached the man's table, she smiled anyway. "Good evening. Can I get you something?" The man stared at the menu without turning a page. "Coffee. Anything to eat?" He shook his head. "Just coffee." Maria walked away. A few minutes later, she returned with the coffee. The man wrapped both hands around the cup but didn't drink. Maria noticed something strange. His breathing was becoming faster. His face had gone pale. She stopped beside the table. "Sir, are you okay?" "I'm fine." But he wasn't. Suddenly, the cup slipped from his hand, crashed onto the floor. The man grabbed his chest and fell sideways against the booth. Maria froze for half a second. Then she ran. She shouted for someone to call an ambulance while she knelt beside him. The restaurant manager rushed over. "Don't touch him. We don't know what's wrong." But Maria remembered something from a first aid course she'd taken years earlier. She checked his breathing. It was weak. She kept him conscious while they waited for the ambulance. "Sir, stay with me." The man's eyes opened slightly. "What's your name?" "Maria." He tried to speak again. "Maria." Then his eyes closed. The ambulance arrived minutes later. The paramedics rushed him away. Before they closed the doors, Maria noticed something fall from his coat pocket. A small black wallet. She picked it up. She ran toward the ambulance, but it had already disappeared into the rain. Maria returned to the restaurant. She opened the wallet only because she needed to identify the man in case the hospital called. Inside was a driver's license, a few credit cards, and one photograph. The photograph showed a young man standing beside an older woman. Maria stared at the name on the license. David Anderson. The name meant nothing to her. She placed the wallet safely behind the restaurant counter. The next morning, a black luxury car stopped outside. Two men in suits entered the restaurant. "Are you Maria?" She nodded. "We're looking for the man who was here last night." Maria handed them the wallet. One of the men looked relieved. "Thank you." Then he said something that made Maria's stomach drop. "Mr. Anderson is the founder and CEO of Anderson Financial Group." Maria looked confused. She had heard of the company. It was one of the largest investment firms in the city. But why would its CEO be sitting alone in a small restaurant at midnight? She didn't have time to ask. The men left. Maria returned to work. She thought that was the end of it. It wasn't. 3 days later, David Anderson walked into the restaurant. This time he looked healthy. He walked directly toward Maria. "I owe you my life." Maria smiled awkwardly. "I'm glad you're okay." David looked around the restaurant. "Can we talk?" They sat at the same booth where he had nearly died. David told Maria that doctors had discovered a serious heart condition. He had ignored the warning signs for years. That night, he had gone for a drive because he couldn't sleep. He didn't know why he had stopped at the restaurant. "I think I was supposed to be there," he said. Maria laughed softly. "Maybe you were." David smiled. Then he asked her something unexpected. "Why did you help me?" Maria looked confused. "Because you needed help. Even though you didn't know who I was?" "Of course." David looked down at the table. "Most people don't." Maria didn't understand what he meant. Then David explained. For years, people had treated him differently because of his wealth. Strangers wanted favors. Business partners wanted contracts. People smiled because they wanted something from him. That night, Maria had helped him without knowing his name, without knowing his money, without expecting anything in return. David wanted to thank her. Maria politely refused his offer of money. "I didn't save you for money." David nodded. "I know." He stood up. Before leaving, he said, "Then let me thank you in a way you can't refuse." Maria smiled. "What's that?" "You'll find out." The next morning, Maria arrived at work to discover something strange. The restaurant was closed. A notice had been taped to the door. Property sold. Maria's heart sank. She immediately called her manager. He didn't answer. An hour later, she learned the truth. The restaurant building had been purchased by Anderson Financial Group. Maria was furious. She thought David had bought the restaurant simply because she had saved him. She felt humiliated. She called his office. "I don't need your charity." David was silent. Then he said, "Maria, come to my office." She almost refused, but she went. When she arrived at the company's headquarters, she was taken to the top floor. David was waiting. Maria immediately confronted him. "You bought my workplace." "Yes." "Why?" David handed her a folder. Inside were photographs of the restaurant. But there was something else. Legal documents. Maria stared at them. The building had been scheduled for demolition. The restaurant had been struggling for years because the property owner planned to sell the entire block to a developer. Maria's manager hadn't told the employees. David had purchased the property before the demolition deal could be completed. Maria looked up. "I don't understand." David smiled. "I didn't buy the restaurant to take it away from you." He pushed another document across the desk. It was a new lease. The restaurant would remain open. But there was one major difference. Maria's manager was no longer the owner. David had transferred ownership of the restaurant to the employees. Maria stared at the document in disbelief. "Why would you do this?" David looked at her. "Because you gave me something nobody else had given me in years." "What?" "The chance to be treated like a human being." Maria's eyes filled with tears. But David wasn't finished. He reached into his desk and pulled out the photograph Maria had seen inside his wallet. It was the same photograph. The young man standing beside the older woman. "My mother," he said. Maria looked closely. Then she recognized the restaurant. It was in the background. She looked at David. "This picture was taken here." David nodded. "My mother worked in this restaurant when I was a child." Maria stared at him. She suddenly remembered an old photograph hanging behind the counter. A woman standing beside a young boy. The restaurant's founder had always told employees that the photograph belonged to the building's history. David explained that his mother had been a waitress there for 20 years. She had raised him while working double shifts. When she became sick, the restaurant owner allowed her to keep working because she had nowhere else to go. That restaurant wasn't just a business to David. It was the place that had raised him. And when he discovered that it was going to disappear, he knew he couldn't let it happen. Maria finally understood. He hadn't bought the restaurant because she saved his life. He bought it because she reminded him of the woman who had once saved his. Before Maria left, David gave her one final envelope. Inside was a key. "The restaurant belongs to the people who made it what it is," he said. Maria held the key tightly. "What am I supposed to do with this?" David smiled. "Open the doors." 6 months later, the restaurant reopened. The sign outside had changed. It now read, "Maria's Table." Underneath were smaller words. "Good food. Good people. Everyone has a seat." Maria stood outside on opening night, watching customers fill the restaurant. On the wall behind the counter hung the old photograph of David and his mother. Beside it was a new photograph. Maria standing with David. Two strangers who had met on a rainy night. One had saved the other's life. The other had unknowingly saved something much deeper. Years later, people would ask Maria why the restaurant had become so successful. She always gave the same answer. Sometimes you help someone because it's the right thing to do. And sometimes, years later, you discover they were sent into your life for a reason. Outside, rain began falling again. Maria looked through the window at the glowing restaurant. She smiled. Some people enter our lives for a moment. Some stay for years. And sometimes, the stranger sitting quietly in the corner is carrying a story that will change your life forever. Fire until the next tale. Keep the fire alive.